Ronit, Herzfeld, welcome to the Earthly Delights podcast. Thank you for coming on. How are you keeping?
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you and be with you.
It's been a long time in the making, but I'm really
Yes.
glad that you agreed to give me your time and to talk about the things that we're going to talk about today. Because as we both feel that they are very pressing. And for the listeners, I just wanted to give a little bit of context for this conversation. And the context would be that me and Ronit would exchange emails. And I kind of asked her recently, what did she feel was the most pressing? What did she think were issues that were not really getting enough time? And this came to me because I also have been feeling recently that there's just so much content everywhere that everybody's just listening to podcasts. Everyone's reading so many books. Everyone's listening to audio books. Everyone's doing this. And I wonder, how valuable are these podcasts and books if we don't have time to really sit with them and sink it in? And I know you feel very similarly. And so
Yes.
I kind of wanted to make a podcast in and around this, in and around of kind of honing in on the idea of what do we really need in our lives? Is it really the frequency of kind of information that we're receiving, or could we try and maybe decrease the amount of information but marinate more on that information?
Well, I love the question, and I love the irony in it, right? Because we are actually applying the same thing that we're saying is an issue here, right? So we're using a podcast and are speaking about something that we say is an issue while doing it ourselves. So just want to make that visible.
Absolutely.
And yes, I mean, right now, whether it's YouTube or it's blogs or it's podcasts or what, we have so much information coming at us. And a lot of it is really good information. A lot of it is valuable information. And yet at the same time, it is spoken so quickly. There's almost like a volleying that goes back and forth. Or even in blogs, there is a concentration of the material and words that are being used. You could take a word sometimes and just write a book about that one word, and really in the capacity to sit down and absorb the meaning. What is it connected to in your life? What does it mean beyond the concept, the construct? How do we embody this information? We don't have the capacity to do so at the rate that it's coming at us and at the rate of complexity that it's coming at us. So I see both issues. It's not only how much information, but so often the information, the words that are being used have so many different meanings and so many different associations that may be perceived by us in ways that are not their intended perception, and we will fill in the gap of what we think it means. So yeah, I think the communication in general, by the way, is very challenging right now for us.
Totally. And even you made a very good point recently that, I mean, and I'm 100% a part of this because I love this, where people are writing books about how we're living and what we're doing and how it's not working. And, they're breaking it down, and there's many like skilled authors, investigators, speakers that are talking about this. And as you said, it's great to hear that, okay, this is not working and why, but there's very few people that are saying, hey, this is working. Like, this can work like this. Let's proceed as if. And I guess I wanted this podcast to touch on that as well. To move away from, we don't want to spend too much time on what's going wrong. Let's go, well, what do we need? What will help us?
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, so that I just want to take kind of a step back and talk a little bit about the way that we perceive information.
Okay.
And we have a capacity to hear something and it connects into something that resonates as a truth. And yeah, I see that. Oh, I see the way that connects. Oh, that feels right. That feels true. And that leads us to believe that I just got that information or I understand it. Now I know it and I can apply it. The reality is that we do have receptor cells for kind of like the ideal map of something, mapping it, the construct. However, on the embodied kind of real level, we don't really have the knowledge or the ability to apply those words into a way of being, changing our behaviors. And, I'm sure that most people can relate to, oh, I really want to be more patient with, my child, or, I want to be more sensitive to my partner in life, whatever. And we have this desire, we have this need, and we then hear something, we go, oh yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to be able to do that. That's what I'm going to apply with my son. And then, of course, at the moment it occurs, there's a whole implicit unconscious thing that's going on and a habit kicks in and we are going to be, reacting from what our body already knows versus what our mind or our intellect knows. And this is what I feel is the gap that's missing right now.
Okay.
In just even beginning to call this out, that is, where people share a map of how to do something in some ways that really mean something to us. But then they forget to remind, okay, so these are words, these are concepts, you can relate to them, they sound good, and they resonate for you. However, applying them in everyday life is a completely different story, and we need to really find ways in which to apply these in everyday life. And the way that happens is by understanding what are my habits or my automatic reactions and triggers with people, where once that gets set off, everything I've learned in the cognition or intellectual just goes out the window because my emotional world is going to take over right now. And I'm just going to react in a knee-jerk way in a way that I did not want to, but too bad. That's just the way we are programmed. So first calling that out, that it's just not enough to know the what and the how in the map, like, okay, you can get from point A to point B. But then on the territory, the map is not the territory. And in everyday life, it looks very different and is not as readily applicable. So that is an area that I am passionate about. I'm passionate about helping people get the proper step-by-step kind of micro instructions where they're able to begin to become aware of their patterns, their defense mechanisms, their reactivities that are often unconscious, and create some kind of a system around them that they can trust, a community or group of people around them that they can trust, that people begin to know what are my automatic triggers, what are my automatic reactivities that I no longer want to, implement. I would like to really learn how to implement the new ways of being, the kinder, the more patient, the more generous, the more sensitive, the more compassionate ways of being. I need to learn how to do that. And will you please intercept me or pause me when you see me react in a certain way and remind me of how I want to react?
Am I right in saying then that part of your discovery is that people can't make this huge shift from information to like embodied demonstration of I actually am changing without a community, without people to actually help them in that process?
Absolutely. And think about it. An infant is born into a social system. An infant is, responding to his environment and is born to adapt. It's an organism that's equipped to adapt to his or her environment through the various social structures that are occurring. So they learn how to be who they are. They learn how to develop responses and associations and relationships with themselves with their families, with their, kindergarten classroom, with their teachers, with their significant others in many ways through socialization. So the programming occurs through socialization. It begins to kind of ingrain in them and become part of their ability to perceive the world and understand the world and organize the world. Most of it implicit, most of it unconscious. And so once those are ingrained, the individual continues to respond from that perspective, to react from that place. That's the automatic reaction. Now, if you want to shift to and repattern or learn new ways of behaving, you need a social milieu. You need a group of individuals around you who are going to re-socialize you or repattern you, in the midst as it's occurring, because that's the way the brain operates. It adapts to environments. It can't be just between you and you, or you and a therapist, or you and a friend. It has to be in the social milieu. So we all have to support each other in the new way we want to operate.
And so for someone who's listening to this and say, actually, this is resonating because I read this book last week on, mindfulness, and I really enjoyed it, but I just snapped at my partner there, and it pretty much went against almost everything that the book was saying. Say if someone is listening in that kind of world, when you're talking about next steps, because a lot of people don't have 5-7 people that they can really trust in a small geographical area, and that they can go, okay, well, when I'm acting out, he or she will call me out on it, but in a nurturing way, not in a very kind of shaming way.
Yes.
What would you recommend for people who are in that kind of place? They say, well, I have the books, but I don't really have the community.
Yes. So who do you have? Do you have one individual? Is there one person in your life that you feel that may be able to be that kind of an ally, and you both are doing it with each other? Do you have 2 individuals? Begin with whatever you have and whomever you have, and of course it requires a certain kind of awareness, one has to learn about the way that we become reactive, the way the triggers take over. So there's a certain kind of reflection that needs to occur where, let's say you're with a significant other and you know that you are snapping at that individual. Then you want to kind of pause and see what was going on that had you snap. What was the feeling behind that? What occurred for you? And there'll be a feeling of, fear of domination, or fear of rejection, or judgment, or, I don't want to do this. Whatever that feeling is, the fear, understanding what is behind it. So what we do is we invite, members to pause each other. Okay, pause. Which is hard to do when you're in the middle of something and you're upset. So that's the first thing that's the hardest to do. So you have to have kind of a contract of, do you trust me, and do I trust you, to pause each other and just take some deep breaths and know that you are in a loop right now. You're in an activated loop, and so let's just pause. And by the way, that loop is part of the brain that is a fast system. So the brain likes to conserve energy. So it really automates reactions and behaviors in general that we repeat often. It just automates it. So just to pause that fast system, take some deep breaths and let, the slow system, another part of the brain that is able to pick up information, to just come in play. And that one can come in with a question: what are you feeling right now? So now you can observe yourself rather than be inside the loop. You can observe what's occurring for you. So training, what are you feeling? So pause, take some breaths, see if you can bring the slower system to play. Witness, question, what am I feeling right now? See if you can connect to the feelings. Then there's usually a story behind that feeling. You know, I'm angry. Okay, what is the story behind that anger? The more that you label, the more that you witness, the more that you objectify what is occurring inside of you, the more distance you have from that emotional reactivity that's just kind of looping you. And so creating that space to just check in. And then once you tell the story, I'm angry at you because, you want me to do this and I don't want to. So the other person may come back and go, oh, that was not my intention. I didn't mean, that's not what I meant. So there might be an opening for a conversation. Whereas if you are in the loop and there's no pausing, you're going to say something that triggers the other person you're speaking with, who then will get into a loop of reactivity right back at you. And now you're often running the both of you into like a loop. And it's all mechanic. It's all automated. And all of it is going to lead you to nowhere except more distress and more disconnect from each other. So the pause, the breath, the what are you feeling right now? What is the story? And then checking with the other person and receiving the other person to get information that is beyond the automatic creates a spaciousness where there's an opportunity to actually begin to repattern, to rewire your reaction to that particular trigger.
This is great stuff. I'm really enjoying this. I'm reminded of particularly of this, or what struck me most is the story, right? Because we think we're just being, I'm just reacting to this thing because it's out of line. We're not realizing very often that actually you're seeing this information or you're seeing this event in the lens of a particular story where you've always been ignored or you've been taken advantage of, or, fill in the blank. And I think that's so powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. I call it the virtual reality of childhood, and which again is nobody's fault. It's just the way that we are wired, the way our brain is wired, and it's wired to just perceive information, find associations between information. So if mom yelled, when I touch something, now I have an association of touch with yell, with fear, with I'm bad, with I'm wrong. I mean, we're really so creative in our ability to weave stories from that kind of innocent, really young, helpless, and simple-minded child that does not have all the information and is very self-referential. And so as the child grows and continues to have these repetitive behaviors in various ways around food, around love, around mom, dad, school, friends, toys, whatever it is, these neural networks are locking in, and then the brain automates them so they can free the other neural systems to learn and continue to grow. So once those get locked in, a mere stimulus, a mere tone of voice, will automatically kind of like ignite that particular neural system of, oh, you don't like me. Oh, you're going to control me. Oh, you're not letting me do what I want. Oh, you hate me, whatever it is. And in the present moment as adults, when that's not at all what's happening. And we will not know what's actually happening until we pause that neural circuitry long enough to actually identify what is the feeling inside and what is the story so we can check it against reality. And it's a beautiful way. And if you keep doing it over and over again, and if you have people around you, if you can find at least one individual and then maybe increase it, that's what I've done with the community. I started with one individual and we just kept increasing it, whereas now we have 16 and sometimes 20, it depends. Individuals who are able to do that with each other very readily, and then they bring it into their environments, and then they help and share it with their, communities, their significant others. And so the ripple effect of pause, what are you feeling right now? What is the story? And what is true? Just activating the slow mind, the slow brain, so that you can begin to think differently and perceive differently.
You mentioned what is true, um, and I can't help but think that very often we conflate um, what is true with either what is familiar or what I think I agree with. And maybe this might be a nice tie-in as well, because I know you want to talk about the ego as well. Um, can you unpack a little more about what is true? Because I think we get, that's a big word that gets very muddled. You're talking about words that get muddled. True is there. So if you could kind of walk us through that a little more, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. So in the context in which I was speaking, it's a little bit easier to find out what true is. That is, when we tend to be reactive around some trigger, if we pause long enough to connect to what we're feeling, what's the story behind it, and we check with the individual that we are communicating with, very often they'll say, that's not my intention. So we can actually find that that was not what the truth of what was happening for that individual. And so that's an easier way. And that's a really good one because it really helps relationships if we can do that on a consistent basis. So that's one kind of truth of what is occurring right now. You're dominating you, you're judging me, you're trying to control me, or whatever it is. And it's like, no, that was not my intention at all. So that's a connection of relational truth. Of course, there are other kinds of truth in terms of perception of reality and belief system, right? So, so we could take politics, or religions. I mean, these are, or nationalities, or, what are refugees, and, all of that. All of them have certain kind of clustered, belief systems around particular religion, around particular culture, etc., politics. And that is really something that's obviously more challenging in so much as we come to identify with our belief systems. It becomes part of our identity, and our identity, implicit in our identity, is our ego attachment to who we are. I believe that this is good. I believe this is bad. And one thing that the ego doesn't like more than anything else on this planet is to be wrong. Well, it probably doesn't want to die, but it doesn't know about that yet. It's kind of like there are layers and layers that are protecting us from knowing that we're going to die, or living in the experience that we are, finite, and that we are not going to be here for the rest of our lives, especially the younger you are. But yeah, the fear of not knowing or being wrong is literally connected to survival. That is, if you think of the average child doesn't know much at all. So when we are little, we don't know. And that not knowing and being taught, being shown what is, renders us in a very kind of helpless state. So we we need to very quickly demonstrate that we know, so that we can feel accepted, we can feel good enough, we can feel valuable, because the child's primary drive is to belong, to be part of a family. And if you don't know something, then you're going to be either judged, you're going to be criticized, you're going to be made fun of, you're going to be punished. I mean, there's a lot of things, we don't really understand the needs of a child and how vulnerable and how sensitive and fragile they are. And we just expect them to just get with the program. Hey, I told you not to do this. Why are you doing this again? Whereas these are words that are not embodied in their being. So they don't know what those words mean. It's through a lot of experience that they learn what they mean. But by then, the adults around them often are impatient and make them feel inadequate. So we all learn, we better know. We better be in the know. And being in the know is tantamount to being belonging and being good enough and being worthy. And so this becomes part of our identity and part of our terror. Of course, it has a whole other piece that we can talk about later, and that is that we end up sacrificing our authentic self, our true self, because that's the other primary drive that we have, which is to be self-expressed authentically. But we can't, because we need to actually defer our needs and our voice to the family, to the belonging group. And so we suppress those aspects of ourselves to a great extent and just really co-opt into the greater group. So belonging is a very important piece of being. And so when we are identifying ourselves with certain beliefs, whether it's in politics or it's in religion or culture or whatever it is, we can't afford to be wrong. We're not giving those up. So we're not going to be open to information readily, because it is tantamount to, on a very primal, visceral level, it's tantamount to being rejected and abandoned and not belonging. And so that's another part of another circuitry that's very deep within us, because we have really suppressed this one a lot. And so our ego will hold on to, I'm right. And it could be about anything. It could be like, why did you, put the dishwasher, the stuff in the dishwasher without, doing X, Y, and Z. And if you notice, most arguments, especially between couples and parents and children, is about who's right and who's wrong. Yeah, there is that sense of domination that actually occurs in there to hold on to my identity and hold on to my belief system. And I know and you don't. It's dangerous for me not to know. And it's dangerous for the ego not to know. So we're all kind of locked in, and many of us, not all and not all the time, but this is the way we operate predominantly. And we see it in our culture. I mean, we see the culture wars, not to mention religious wars and economic wars and political wars. Did I answer your question? It's complicated.
No, what came up for me there was how, again, speaking generally, is that we find it hard to accept the possibility that we can only really know what's true for us, like what's true going on there, and then it's true out there. We can lose our minds trying to pin down exactly what's true out there. And I wonder, are we spending too much time wondering what's potentially true out there and not enough time wondering what's inside, what's true for me, what's happening here?
Yes, I mean, that's the outcome, right, of the implication of the system is that you can't really, as a child, you can't afford to be in what's true in here, because you have to conform in order to adapt and belong. So at some point when we're older, we're continuing to project, how can I fit in? How can I belong? And it is extremely difficult for us to actually pause that and risk, being wrong out there or not following the norm out there in the service of what is true for me and going and reclaiming the self, which is the most important thing we could possibly do. But frankly, there are, again, going back to what we started with, there are no, the maps that are being given to how to go within to discover what's true in here are not really giving this step-by-step kind of unpacking of the layers and layers and layers of protection and defenses that we have developed over the years in order to feel that we belong out there somehow, that we are part of society, and it's vital for us to feel that. So in a way, even the desire for self-awareness, if you look at the books and there's so many books on, personal development and spirituality and growing, and but most of them are all about the individual going within themselves by themselves, which is not going to help them if they don't have a support group around them, or at least one individual around them, to help them see those parts of themselves that their ego will not want to see.
Yeah.
So you cannot really unpack yourself because you are literally wired to protect yourself from those parts of you that are wrong, or those parts of you that are scared or in pain. And so we need to create environments where, this is universal. We're all scared. We're all wrong. We all don't know. In the greatest scheme of things, we don't know. We're doing the best that we can with what we've got. And can we come together as a group and really kind of acknowledge this truth, and then unpack together and be vulnerable together and be transparent together. And therefore, I will belong to the not knowing. I will not be so ashamed because everybody around me doesn't know as well. And we cannot know together. We can be lost together. And then it will free us to actually begin to feel more deeply what's inside of us. And by the way, even then, it's very difficult because our system is wired not to feel this pain, to avoid feeling this pain. So we need a lot of holding hands. We need a lot of compassion, and really a sense of like, you're okay, and dealing with the shame, dealing with the discomfort in the body, which is, a path to how to help us move in the direction of beginning to challenge our ideas and our understanding of who I am and really who I've become, and really uncover and reveal, discover step by step, layer by layer, the original self, which is absolutely radiant and magnificent, but we don't know that yet.
That's probably the most incisive kind of explanation as to why we can't do it alone I've ever heard. I think it was really, really insightful. Thank you. Maybe we can move on a little bit just towards how you closed your kind of exploration of why we've grown up, and why we need to be right on some level, and why it is fair enough to be afraid of being wrong, and how, like you said, we've learned to dodge the pain and dodge these uncomfortable emotions, or if they come, if not dodge them, do something that kind of suppresses them or rejects them, does something to get you away from that feeling. And I guess what I hear from you, and what I've heard a few times before, is that these feelings are actually the pathway to really, really learning about ourselves, and that this pain that our culture doesn't really want to accept. I mean, I was just talking to you before the podcast about the sadness that I've been feeling recently, that, we kind of live in a world where, there's no space for sadness. There's, and if there's sadness there, well, cheer up. I mean, it could be worse. And actually this time for sadness is just as valuable as the beautiful times.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things here, and I'll focus on the first direction that you led me toward, and that is, why do we avoid the pain? So, as an organism, all organisms are, programmed to move towards comfort, and because when the organism is comfortable and it's receiving its, it's fulfilling its needs in a way that will optimize its success for living. And when there is pain, it's usually an indicator of something is wrong. Now, when we hurt ourselves physically, let's say, I don't know, you burn yourself in the kitchen, or you cut your finger or something, we don't ignore that pain. We immediately bring all of our attention to, the blood, and say, oh, what happened there? So the pain is an indicator that something is wrong, and pay attention and attend to it because you need to heal it. And we all do that for the most part. And we recognize that that's a necessary thing. If I have a constant, backache and I can't move, then I'm going to go to the doctor, etc. So with the physical pain, we seemingly, for the most part, are paying attention to it, albeit there are also exceptions to that rule because of fear of going to the doctors, etc. But just talking about the organism at large. Now, the emotional pain is a completely different world. And my belief, and this is just me based on the work that I've been doing with so many individuals and families over the years, what occurred to me is that when we talked earlier about when the child is being socialized, but the child is really kind of an embodied organism. It's born hypersensitive to sound, to the vision, to taste, tactile. I mean, they're just like, they have many more neurons than we do. Than adults do. We're born with 200 billion neurons, and by the age of 25, we're prone to 100 billion. And so neurons are, right, sensory in cells. And so among many other things. And so children perceive so much more and experience so much more, and they're much more emotionally sensitive, and they live in the world through their sensory. And then we kind of superimpose language on them, the symbolic language, which is words, but the words are not tangible. So it's not like a glass of water where they can feel it. They can see the water, they can drink from the glass, and they understand, okay, this is a three-dimensional, tangible thing. I know what a glass of water is. But when we say to them, okay, it's time to go to bed because it's late, they don't understand the term late, and their body doesn't want to go to bed. So, and many of their interactions during their day-to-day lives is in the symbolic world. And so their body is constantly being assaulted by symbolic words that our parents are making them follow when they don't understand what those words mean. So there is a disorganization in their bodies, in their sensory, in their drives, in their, needs with what the society, the parental world is asking of them and demanding of them, sometimes forcibly. If they want another cookie, if they don't want to, stop playing, if they don't want to take a shower. I mean, all of these experiences are assaulting them in ways, and the words are assaulting them in ways that they cannot make sense out of it. And we're not aware that we need to kind of go slow and help them understand how these words mean in their bodies and soothe them in a certain way. And so this constant assault, emotional assault, that sometimes is experienced as physical, whether the parents are screaming at them and then that's a terror in their body, or, actually being hit in some way. So that pain just gets locked in the body. It gets locked in. And the child really, on an emotional level, I call it, becomes a flailing child. They're just flailing in this organization of just pain and discomfort and uncertainty of what is asked of them. Why is this happening? And they get to a point where they cannot tolerate the pain anymore at all. And so there's a part of them that begins to just dissociate from the body, just literally remove, numb their body and dissociate into the symbolic world and begin to live and try to grasp and understand the symbolic world, which necessarily numbs or diminishes access to their bodily sensations to a great degree. And that kind of reactivity, which is an adaptation for the child in order for the child to survive, is an essential part of numbing some of the discomfort and, the kind of the incongruence and the disorganization that's occurring in the body. It numbs that, but it also ends up numbing a lot of the other goodies that we get from experiencing nature or experiencing a beautiful experience with another human being. So connection in relationship, connection in the heart. And so that place now, what I call the flailing child, is in there. The child then kind of like dissociates and moves into what I call the fraudulent adult, where it learns how to live and operate in a symbolic world, in a fraudulent world, because the child essentially has given up a part of him or herself. And then this other space occurs in between, which is what I call the liminal space. And that's the space where when the fraudulent adult begins to feel some kind of discomfort or some kind of challenge to his or her identity or pain, the liminal space where a lot of the defense mechanisms, a lot of the protective mechanisms that won't allow him or her to move to the flailing child level, will then kind of come in and protect the individual, protect the fraudulent adult, protect the identity, protect the understanding and organization of the world as I know it, from going into the liminal space and going deeper into the flailing child where everything is disorganized. So if we took away the identity, if we took away the belief system, the flailing child is right there, and that places terror. It's disorganized. So a lot of the work that I'm doing with individuals, excuse me, is actually holding them in, and reflecting, the kind of the fraudulent behaviors, holding that space and allowing them to move deeper into the liminal space to see their defense mechanisms, and then helping them to move into the flailing child, that disorganized terror, discomfort. I don't know what's going on. I'm never going to get out of this mess, and begin to organize that space for them. But that requires an extraordinary amount of sensitivity, consideration, care, and appreciation and compassion for how painful it is to be exposed for the fraud, quote unquote, or the, wrong that I am operating in right now, and override the defense mechanisms. There are so many protective mechanisms that won't, will not let you, kind of get to the bottom line of, okay, so if my whole reality in this area is completely deconstructed, what am I left with? I'm left with a chaotic, flailing child, and I don't know how to get out of there. So unless I have a support system to organize that environment that nobody had done before, because nobody knew how to, with now a competent adult that actually exists in you, that can bring that competent adult into the flailing child space with the support of people who are really there to help guide you and show you that you're not merely a fraudulent adult, but you're also a very competent adult that needs to go and integrate the flailing child so that you no longer need the defensive mechanism, and you can actually integrate your wholeness into being and embrace and accept your limitations, your weaknesses, and your strengths, and accept life as is. Now, that was a very complex thing, I think. I don't know, how did that land?
Landed well for me. It landed well for me. I don't know, I think that what comes up for me is that trust, is that you talk like really eloquently about this, about the levels and layers in which the child, nearly all of us, went through, and how we learn that certain emotions we better rise above that. We better go to the mind instead of feeling that pain because it's just too much. And how people in their adult life need a competent adult to walk them through with that. But I often wonder, are we exploring enough the level of trust one person needs to have with that? Because it's like you said, you're handing over a lot of that child sensitivity, and
for sure. And I'm not suggesting that this is easy at all. The only thing I want to illuminate is that there is a path. There is a path, and it works. And I know it works because we've been doing it with my community for the past 10 years. And, these are individuals from various cultures, socioeconomic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and are all over the world, and who've been doing it together for the past 10 years. And so the whole thing began on a foundation of trust. And not that we had it, but pointed out. And the way that we established that is by naming certain values, choosing certain values that we were committed to showing up with consistently. And so the way I define trust is being with integrity to who you are, what you say, and how you describe yourself and how you show up. If you consistently be that which you say you are, then I can trust you. I can even trust you if you say, hey, I'm a liar, and I know it, and then you lie, then I can trust that you're a liar. So if there is consistency with, I'm a caring human being, and then you show up caring, then if over time, if you operate in a very consistent way over time and you acknowledge it and you own it, then I can trust you. Now, what we did is we established certain guidelines, agreements, and values in the community, and we defined them very specifically. So, for example, our first value was humility, and that is that, we are recognizing that we don't know. We think we know, but we don't know. So we need to come into this exploration, into this experiment with each other, with inquiry, open-mindedness, and, being willing to suspend our belief systems to some extent. Now, that is an intention. That is an intentional value. Another intentional value is conscious communication. I need to be connected to what I'm feeling, connected to what you're feeling, connected to what the context in which we're speaking, and what are some of the triggers that may occur between us. Or another one is, commitment to cooperation. I understand that we can't operate individually in silos. We need each other, etc. Now, for each one of these, it's not as if we showed up that way on a consistent manner, because we didn't at all. But those were the values that we were committing to showing up as, and inviting each other to call us when we are not showing up that way, and inviting that I will listen and I will cop to it rather than defend or protect. And so with the various values and defining what they look like on the court, and agreeing that I am giving you permission to hold me accountable, and I will listen and not deflect when you do hold me accountable, over time, I'm going to become much more humble, much more conscious of communicating with you, much more cooperative, much more with integrity, etc. So the whole idea of trust is that we hold a common value or values that we agree that we're going to operate from. B, knowing that we're not able to operate from them at all yet. But we are committed to doing so. And when I'm not doing so, then I would like for you to hold me accountable. And if we do that consistently over time, so I'll give you an example. In the beginning, people didn't have a sense of being on time. And so we had a meeting at 11 o'clock, and people would show up at 11:05, 11:20, won't communicate about it. And so there was like no integrity with your being accountable to the community and to your agreement. You agreed to be here at 11, you're not here at 11. So when you come in at 11:05, what's that all about? And over a period, really not long, of maybe a couple of times where people didn't show up on time, everybody began to come in and show up exactly at 11 o'clock. And if there was an issue, even if they were going to be 2 minutes late, they texted and said, I'm going to be 2 minutes late. I'm having a technical problem, or I'm just finishing on a phone call. I'll be 2 minutes late. So again, it's not being rigid. It's really about communication. That's conscious communication. So I'm going to be 2 minutes late or 5 minutes late because of such and such. And so with regard to our values, I can tell you that with our values right now, the community is 85, 90% consistent. And the level of trust is immense as a result of continually holding ourselves and each other accountable to being trustworthy, to being accountable, to being with integrity, to being predictable. I can count on you. If you're going to say X is going to happen, I know X is going to happen. And or if, like you're not yet in some area, I can count that you're not going to be predictable. And that you're not going to be accountable. And it's predictable for me in that regard as well. And we take ownership of that. We agree. Okay. Don't count on me for that because that's not my strength right now. Who else can I count on for that? And so that's how the community operates in ways where we're constantly holding the space for people to grow into being more trustworthy through experience over time and consistency over time, while we are allowing them to be where they are, and not making them wrong, because it's just a function of, reprogramming again or repatterning our behaviors. But we have aligned values, agreements. And that is, I think, a first place to begin for any kind of trust to occur. Do we understand the words to mean the same and in real life, in everyday moment-to-moment experiences?
That's great. Yeah, for people who are listening that want to learn more as well, I'll send the link. I'll provide a link for all the work you're doing at Leap Forward, and this kind of beautiful interpretation of how beautiful method how people can grow together. And I really like that idea that if someone that you're working with, that you're building with, is slacking with time, is slacking about something else, I can get that in by that date, and they don't, it still leaves room for them growing. Just, all right, I can't rely on them for that particular thing. It doesn't mean that they're a lost cause, which I think is great to hear. It's uplifting because we all have flaws, right? We're all going to be struggling in some level.
Yes, and just to refine that point a little bit, there is a real clarity, and that comes from our understanding that we are part of nature, and we, just like nature, we're susceptible to the environment around us. And so when a tree grows crooked towards the light, we don't say, what a stupid tree. We appreciate that the tree is growing in that direction because it's seeking what it needs in order to survive. And we, human beings, are subject to exact same lawfulness, natural lawfulness. So if someone is not able to, show up on time, or they are inconsistent in saying they're going to, deliver something and they don't deliver it, or they don't communicate when they should have. We recognize that those are the environments in which they grew. Those things were not present. And so they were not instilled with those values. They were not instilled with those patterns. And yet they really are seeking an authentic space for belonging, that where they can be fully self-expressed and be accepted as they are. And so we don't judge people. We don't make people wrong. We understand how they came about, the various attributes and ways in which they're being, and we see what works and we see what doesn't work. We ask them what works, what doesn't work, and then we just help them find their authentic self-expression so that they can be liberated from the old patterns and be fully self-expressed in their authentic self. So there's a constant state of you're seen, you're cared for, you're validated, you're accepted just the way you are, and where would you like support in order to expand and connect more deeply into yourself so that you can free yourself from the patterns from the past.
Thanks for this, Ronit. I think this is going to really help a lot of people. And why I think this is so important is because I think it was on our last call that we talked about how, out in the world, there's so many variables that we can't control, and that things are going to go wrong often, and there's going to be pain, and there's going to be real financial difficulties, there's going to be personal difficulties. And I remember when I asked you and you said, yeah, but we need to know that we have some people that are in our corner that can support us through this, and that if anything, that's what we need. That's because I I mean, I fall into the trap sometimes as well of thinking that, oh, if I just do this and I just do that, I can kind of dodge this and I can be resilient here. But ultimately, like, I've found it hard as well to be away in the world that I want to be without support of others. And I'm sure there are loads of people listening that feel that as well, that in their head, maybe on a good day, they're like this, but on a bad day, they're not so strong on those qualities. And that it's good to know that on those days where your qualities aren't as strong, there's still people that say, hey, we're in your corner, we love you, we care about you. This is part of the process.
Yes. Yes. Life is, challenging. There's so many variables that are coming at us that we need to juggle, and just recognizing that life has a lot of pain and a lot of pleasure. It has a lot of challenges and a lot of triumphs, and that neither one is the only way. This duality that we live in, it's all or nothing. No, we call it this and that. Both can coexist, and both do coexist. When we're caught in some kind of a negative, kind of loop, and where we're seeing more the darkness, it's so amazing to have somebody, by our corner who's going to be able to like reflect, yeah, but what about this? Look at how well you're doing this, or look at what a beautiful day you had a week ago. And so to help expand our perception of reality and the emotional, kind of qualities that exist within us, and allow us to experience simultaneously a variety of different experiences. To want to avoid pain and to want to avoid challenges and difficulties is generally because we don't know that we can contend with them really well, and we can actually tolerate them really well. We have not been given the tools and the kind of the practices and the muscles, to know, hey, I'm not a child, I'm an adult. I can deal with this pain. I can pass through this phase. And I know that when I do, there's something beyond this moment. So having somebody to carry that pain with me, to hold that space with me, where I'm not feeling alone, where I'm feeling that I am part of a universal experience, which is all of us are in this at some time or another, and this shall pass as well. And then something else will arise, but I want to experience it all. I don't want to just have the pleasure, because then I'm not going to experience the depth of the heights of the pleasure, because I can't experience the depth of the displeasure or the discomfort. So whatever we call into our lives, whatever we're open to, that's what we're going to receive. And so if we're going to open to, like the pain, we will also receive the amazing, pleasure and joy. They're proportional. And the kind of dissociation that we had done, which I mentioned before, where we had to move from the flailing child into the fraudulent adult, and in a way suppress and numb parts of us. When we start clearing that, and actually as adults can contend with the discomfort of the child and can organize that space and integrate it, and that adult can actually deal with the pain and just open and become more porous and more porous and more porous to life, then it is absolutely magnificent. It's magnificent pain, and it's magnificent pleasure and triumph. And that's where you feel so fully alive. And that's when life takes on a different kind of vitality. I mean, honestly, the flowers are more radiant, the sounds are more amazing. Everything, we become more porous and have greater access to what does it mean to be an organism on this planet right now. And therefore have more options for imagination and creativity of solving, different challenges that are arising within, between, and globally.
Beautifully put, Ronit. I think, I guess if I was to think of a message that I could try and maybe come towards a summary, is that we are not our patterns, right? When you kind of dissected how very often emotionally speaking, the brain just goes, oh, okay, oh, you feeling that? Let me just go through this story again. And because we're trying to conserve energy, right? And this is probably
Yes.
information that people aren't familiar
Yes.
with. And I can't help but think that if we can take something that which is crucial from this conversation, is that there's a part of us that is a step further behind these patterns, right? And that there's a part of us that can be able to say, hey, what's really going on? And then through really difficult work and through feeling a lot more pain and a lot more praise, we can become more authentic. Because that brain pattern that you talk about, it sounds so unauthentic. It sounds so like, oh, let me just revert back to this thing that's been happening for 4 decades.
Necessarily, right? Again,
Yeah.
the child had to utilize this kind of protection to give up a piece of himself or herself for that. So necessarily, that's the case. And yet, you're right. And this is actually an indicator that a higher self lives inside of us, is when we're hearing all these podcasts, when we're hearing these YouTubes, and we're reading these books, and we're inspired by that idealized, like, possibility that lives within us. That's, Plato calls the recollection of our original self. We're recollecting, we're bringing together the original self. That's the ideal part of us. However, we have to kind of work through the machinery, the mechanistic aspect of the patterns that have been wired along the way and hardened along the way. And we need to deconstruct those patterns. And then the organism will know what to do. So actually, all we have to do is clear the noise, clear the static. The signal is in there, but it's really dim right now. And so it's only in the idealized. How do we find a way for that signal, for that light, to shine completely through? It's through clearing a lot of the noise and the strategies that the child had to implement in order to be able to survive in a very, very difficult environment. And as adults, we can actually handle those environments much better because we have the skills and the capacity, cognitively, emotionally, physically, spiritually, that the child never had. So let's claim the adult aspects of us. Go and soothe that child, heal that child, and integrate the beauty of that child, the light, the curiosity, the awe, the wisdom, that original self. And yeah, we would all be healthier, more vibrant human beings. And the planet will be more healthy and vibrant. So that we're part of this ecosystem. So it's really the totality.
This is fantastic. I'll be listening to this several times to really let it marinate in, let it trickle down. I wonder if you would just for a few minutes maybe like sit with someone who, like, for instance, right, you say this to me and I feel so good about it. I feel like she's really speaking something that's deeper than what a lot of what I'm hearing. And it also inspires me to know that, hey, I can move past these difficult emotions. I can move past these patterns. And I would say it resonates with me. I think it's true. It's very true. And I trust what you're saying. And I guess I would be interested to know if there's something that you could provide the listeners with, for instance, maybe there might be someone listening and say, yeah, I actually quite like what Ronit is saying here. But because, like you said, a lot of us aren't so good at really feeling deep down, well, how do we feel about this? Can you invite listeners to maybe go in with themselves and ask themselves, well, if I'm resonating with Ronit, or if I think I like what I say, how do I know that this is true for me? And how do I know that actually she's just kind of saying things that sound nice, or that I agree with, right? Because a lot of us just go, oh yeah, I agree with that, so it's true. And so there's no real kind of wrestle work internally.
Yeah. So that's a tough one, right? I mean, because one can talk about one's experiences, from my childhood and what I studied and all the practice and experiences I've done throughout the 40 years and validate myself in this regard. But that's not going to be, something that is, I believe, is worthy of trust. At the end of the day, the trust occurs, and this is the way I've worked with everyone my whole life, is when you're feeling it firsthand, So if there's anything I said that resonates and, you want to validate it for yourself in your own experiences, because that's the only way the truth really reveals itself to you. It's not believing somebody by words. It's by practicing or experiencing it personally. Then find an individual in your life and share this maybe podcast with that individual. You can read, you can go to the website, because it really gives a step-by-step kind of elucidation of our work, including videos of the work of how to pause, what are you feeling right now, and just the way the community works. In addition to another website, pause.us, which actually gives a whole bunch of other information. But then practice that. Invite somebody in your life and practice it in your life. Try it once or twice. See what happens. Because honestly, at the end of the day, the only way you can reveal truth is by experiencing the resonance in your body through experiences and not merely through the words. The words will point you there. The words are the map. They're right. They're the symbol, but the words are not the territory. And the only way that you can actually believe something and know it to be true is by you experiencing it in your body. So try that.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time, Ronit. Before we end, I just wanted to ask, is there something that you'd like to share that maybe we haven't touched on, or is there something that I asked but you thought, oh, maybe I just extend this point, or just any closing remarks or anything?
I mean, it's funny, what arises for me right now is just this extraordinary amount of love in my heart for humanity at large, but in particular for you and whoever is listening. And I know that we bandy the word love in such a, like, what does it, it's another one of those symbols, right? It's not something that's readily experienced, but we use it all the time. I love you. I love you. But so what I can share with, like what is arising inside of me right now is this overwhelming feeling of warmth. And it's kind of like a percolation that is just overflowing for me, and has this extraordinary desire to like touch every person in their heart and just like feel me. I don't know how else to convey this beyond words. But just feel me. And we are love. It's in there. It's not a doing and it's not a feeling. It's a knowing in the deepest sense of being of we want to care for each other. We want to promote each other's well-being and health. We want to support each other. We want to hold each other when we're in pain. We want to know we're not alone. We're all in this together. And I'm just like I'm just feeling that. So that's what came up when you said that.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thanks so much for your time, Ronit. And
my pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you for creating the space, No,
I think it's really, really crucial. And I hope that the listeners take some of what you've been providing and sharing. And and kind of do the science, right? As in hear the information and then see if it works for you. And
absolutely. It's all in that. And if I may just, before we end, I just really want to acknowledge you. And just you came into my life through a blog that you wrote about Kendrick and Lamar. And I was so deeply, deeply, deeply moved by you. And we shared it with the community. And we were so deeply moved. And I just want to express my appreciation for who you are and the clarity and the wisdom that lives within you, and that you are a ray of light, and I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful that we got to get to know each other, and I hope that our relationship expands.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you so much for reaching out to me, and having you in my life is a huge addition. Your warm heart is everything. So yeah, your welcoming nature and your openness and your sincerity is just also just inspiring. And yeah, I don't have too much words to express, but just a very deep gratitude and yeah, thank you for reaching out, because if you didn't, we would
My
never have
pleasure.
it. So thank you so much.
I couldn't not. Yeah. You're too brilliant.